And all eyes were on the Supreme Court. Perhaps the judgment wasn't entirely a surprise for many, but I guess what we need to understand is, where does it take us back in time?
Well, what it does now, it means that we go back to the 2007 decision taken actually by Mmusi Maimane back in 2007, in November of 2007, to prosecute President Jacob Zuma just ahead of the ANC's Polokwane conference. Remember that the big issue around dropping the charges was the serving of the indictment. So now that Mmusi Maimane dropped the charges based on a technicality and using the wrong law to drop the charges, that means that the 2007 decision stands, and Shaun Abrahams will now have to sit down, look at the court papers, and then decide how does it go forward with this decision. However, though, we have to emphasize that there is still a possibility of going to the Constitutional Court, but it will be a bit difficult, because if we look into this court judgment, the court judgment is based on a technicality that a wrong law was used.
All right, so Shaun Abrahams, a huge decision to make under all sorts of pressure, not just from his own office, but from political parties.
Well, certainly, and quite interesting, though, is that if you look at President Jacob Zuma's statement, he issued a statement just after the court ruling. President Jacob Zuma states that while now it's indicated that the decision that was taken was irrational, this means now that a legitimate decision needs to be taken. The decision now goes back to the NDPP. However, though, President Jacob Zuma wants to be given an opportunity to make representation. And that's the other thing that Shaun Abrahams needs to take into consideration, how he goes about dealing with this matter, whether he will afford President Jacob Zuma an opportunity to make representation. President Jacob Zuma's counsel also tried to steer the court into convincing Shaun Abrahams to allow President Jacob Zuma to make representation, but the court steered clear of that and said that that decision lies entirely with the NDPP, and you know this debate that around the separation of powers.
All right, I believe that you have a guest to take this story further.
Well, yes, we have Mmusi Maimane, who's joining us all the way from Pretoria. Good evening, Mmusi, and thank you so much for joining us this evening. Let's quickly start with the decision taken by this High Court, the High Court stating that the 2007 decision to charge President Jacob Zuma still stands.
Absolutely, and we believe that Jacob Zuma has a case to face when it comes to questions of corruption, racketeering. And ultimately, we believe that he must get what he's always asked for, which is his day in court. The first question that was always on the table was that the decision to drop the charges against Jacob Zuma was irrational. And therefore, if it was irrational to drop the decision, we believe the charges stand. So from my interpretation of both the Gauteng North High Court judgment and now the confirmation taken through by the Supreme Court of Appeal, we would argue the case that Jacob Zuma now has charges that he's facing. He should not be making representation at the NPA. He should rather go making representation at a court once he's been given an indictment and a court date to appear.
And quite interesting is that when you look at the 2009 representation that he made to the NPA in February, there's a list of issues that the President Jacob Zuma raised at the time while he was just president of the ANC. And one of those issues is prosecuting a sitting president has legal implications.
Look, the argument, I think, is irrelevant, because I think more than anything that he is, as a sitting president, he's already used taxpayers' money to obfuscate this case. And as it would happen, he now is facing charges. And as the President of the Republic, I believe he must set an example. He must prove the fact that beyond even the Nkandla matter where he tried to delay the court case, he should now, in a criminal corrupt case, he must face the charges. You know, when we deal with the question of tax as a law, we asked back then former Finance Minister Pravin Gordhan, we said, is the president exempt from tax law? And then Finance Minister said the president, like any other citizen, is subject to the same laws. He's not exempt from tax law, and if he was to go against tax law, he'd face prosecution. There's no difference in this instance. He faces a criminal case, he must face it, and he must ultimately have his day in court.
I guess this also goes to the oath of office that the president takes to uphold, protect, and defend the Constitution. And one of the things in the Constitution is that we are all equal in front of the law.
Absolutely, and the case in many ways is at one level about Jacob Zuma, but at a most crucial level, it must provide the safeguard for all South Africans, that it does not matter what office you hold, you will ultimately be subject to the law. And in fact, the oath of office taken by the president says it's not only just the constitution, it's also all its related laws is the oath that the president takes. And this is a very important law that we must put to test, that all citizens are subject to the same law. Jacob Zuma must go to court, make submissions, and if he's found guilty, he must face the same criminal process as any other person.
Mmusi, just quickly in 5 seconds perhaps, what do you think this court case makes of Mkhothedi Mshe's conduct and whether Mkhothedi Mshe should be recalled as an acting judge?
No, this is not about, obviously, the setting aside of the case does raise those questions, but I don't think we should go down. We should now look at Shaun Abrams and make sure that his conduct is such that he sets the charges and he proceeds. He mustn't make the same error twice.
Well, thank you very much. Mmusi Maimane, the DA leader, joining us all the way from Pretoria. Peter, there you have it. Everything is now in the hands of Shaun Abrams. And as Mmusi has said there, Shaun Abrams must make sure that he does not make the same mistake as done by Mkhothedi Mshe.
Aldrin, thanks very much. We'll continue chatting this